Behind the glitter and charm of old Hollywood, there are stories that never made the headlines, moments of kindness, quiet acts of respect, and the personal truths of famous faces when the cameras stopped rolling. In 1958, the Rio Bravo set at Old Tucson Studios was buzzing with energy, and for good reason. Director Howard Hawks had brought together a cast that could only be described as legendary: John Wayne, Dean Martin, and rising stars who were just stepping into the spotlight. Among them was Angie Dickinson, a young actress nervous about holding her own in a production this big, and Ricky Nelson, the teenage heartthrob whose music and charisma had already made him a household name. Most people saw Ricky as the confident performer, always smiling, always perfect. But Angie was about to discover another side to him, one that would stay with her for decades. It wasn't about grand gestures or flashy headlines. It was about how he treated people, how he respected the craft, and how he found small, meaningful ways to lift the spirits of everyone around him. For more than 60 years, Angie kept this story to herself. But when she finally spoke about it, she revealed a version of Ricky Nelson that few people ever knew, one that would change how fans remembered him forever. The first time Angie Dickinson walked onto the Rio Bravo set, her nerves were at their peak. She was surrounded by Hollywood royalty and had to prove herself in every scene. John Wayne was the ultimate Western star, Dean Martin was the smooth, charming entertainer turned actor, and Ricky Nelson, though only 18, was already a music sensation with screaming fans and chart-topping records. Angie expected Ricky to carry himself the way many young stars did, confident to the point of arrogance, keeping his distance from the crew, and surrounded by assistants who shielded him from too much interaction. But when Ricky arrived on set, something surprised everyone. Instead of acting like the star everyone expected him to be, he introduced himself to crew members by name. He asked about their jobs. He made them feel seen. There was no ego, no sense of entitlement, just a young man genuinely curious about the world of filmmaking. Angie watched him closely in those first few days, and she began to notice that this wasn't a one-time act to make a good first impression. It was simply who Ricky was. He had a way of blending in as part of the team rather than standing apart as the star, and it set the tone for how the whole production would feel over the weeks ahead. In Hollywood, it's common for actors, especially ones already famous in another field, to focus only on their own roles and stay in their comfort zones. But Ricky Nelson approached the set like a classroom. He was eager to learn, not just about acting, but about every technical aspect of making a movie. While other actors spent downtime in their trailers, Ricky wandered around the set asking the lighting crew about their equipment, talking to the camera operators about angles, and watching stunt rehearsals with fascination. He wanted to know why certain lenses were used, how lighting could change a scene's mood, and how stunts were planned for safety. For Angie, who was still new to the film industry, watching Ricky's curiosity was eye-opening. Here was a teenager, already adored by millions, taking the time to understand and appreciate the work of every department. It wasn't just politeness, it was respect for the craft and for the people who made it possible. And the best part was that Ricky's interest seemed completely genuine. He wasn't asking questions to impress anyone, he simply wanted to learn. Angie realized that this kind of humility was rare in Hollywood, and she quietly began to admire him for it. Ricky's attitude had a surprising ripple effect on the Rio Bravo crew. Normally, a film set has a certain hierarchy, big stars stay in their own circle, and crew members keep their heads down and focus on their work. But Ricky blurred those lines. His genuine respect for everyone inspired the crew to go the extra mile. The cameramen experimented with new techniques because they knew Ricky would appreciate the artistry. The sound crew, touched by his interest in their work, paid extra attention to making every scene perfect. Even seasoned actors like John Wayne seemed more relaxed, sometimes pausing to give extra guidance to younger performers. Angie noticed this shift and realized that Ricky's quiet example was influencing the entire production. It wasn't just about his performance, it was about the environment he helped create. Ricky's approach showed that respect is contagious. When one person treats others with genuine kindness, it encourages everyone else to do the same. For Angie, this was a lesson in professionalism she would carry with her throughout her career. True respect isn't demanded, it's earned through actions. About 3 weeks into filming, Angie arrived on set to find something unexpected. Sitting on her director's chair was a folded piece of paper with her name written neatly across it. Inside was a handwritten note from Ricky Nelson. It wasn't long or overly dramatic, just a heartfelt message praising her performance from the previous day and thanking her for helping him become a better actor. At the bottom, he had signed his name with a small doodle of a guitar. Angie was stunned, not just by the compliment, but by the fact that Ricky had gone out of his way to watch a scene they didn't even share. He had no obligation to pay attention to her performance, yet he had done so and taken the time to let her know he appreciated it. Over the next few weeks, Angie realized that these notes weren't a one-time gesture, they were something Ricky did for many people on set. A grip who worked late to perfect a shot, a costume assistant who made last-minute adjustments, a makeup artist who solved a tricky problem, all might find a small note from Ricky acknowledging their efforts. These weren't grand public displays meant to win attention, they were private, thoughtful acts that made people feel valued. It wasn't just the notes. Ricky seemed to have an uncanny sense of timing when it came to lifting people's spirits. On long filming days when exhaustion was setting in, he might casually strum his guitar between takes, not performing for attention, but creating a soft background melody that made the work feel lighter. Sometimes he would crack a perfectly timed joke that made the crew burst into laughter, breaking the tension without slowing down the day's work. Angie noticed that this was never forced. Ricky wasn't trying to be the center of attention. Instead, he was reading the room, sensing when people needed a boost, and offering it in the most natural way possible. The effect was powerful. Crew members began looking out for each other more. People worked together with more patience and kindness. Even small disagreements seemed to fade faster. It was as if Ricky's quiet leadership had reshaped the atmosphere into one where everyone felt like part of the same team. One day, the Rio Bravo set faced one of its most challenging moments. A complicated scene involving multiple characters was being filmed, but everything that could go wrong seemed to happen at once. The lighting kept changing because of shifting clouds, the sound crew was battling interference from a nearby radio signal, and take after take had to be discarded. Frustration was rising fast. Angie could see tempers starting to flare, and she braced herself for the kind of tension that could bring a production to a standstill. But instead of retreating to his trailer like many stars might, Ricky stayed on set and began asking the crew about the technical problems. He didn't act like he could fix them, he simply showed genuine interest in what they were facing. His calm curiosity seemed to slow the tension and refocus the crew. By treating the situation as something to understand rather than something to be angry about, Ricky helped shift the mood. It was a subtle moment, but Angie never forgot it. It showed her that leadership isn't always about taking control, it can be about setting the right emotional tone so others can do their jobs better. By the end of filming, Angie Dickinson's view of Ricky Nelson had completely changed. She had expected to work alongside a charming young star, but instead, she had met someone whose humility, kindness, and quiet thoughtfulness were rare even in everyday life, let alone in Hollywood. Ricky didn't seek attention for his good deeds, and he never acted like the rules of respect and hard work didn't apply to him. His approach to the set showed Angie that real professionalism is about more than just talent, it's about how you treat people, especially when no one else is watching. Over the years, as Angie's own career grew and she worked with countless actors, directors, and crews, she often thought back to her time with Ricky on the Rio Bravo set. His way of moving through the world, with curiosity, humility, and genuine care for others, remained a lasting example. And when she finally shared this story decades later, it wasn't to add to his legend as a performer. It was to reveal the quiet truth about the kind of person he was, a truth she believed his fans deserved to know. He spent time with the sound engineer learning about the interference problem. He chatted with the lighting team about working with natural light. His curiosity and genuine concern transformed what could have been a miserable day into an impromptu learning experience. By the time the technical issues were resolved, the entire crew felt more connected and energized than they had at the start of the day. Angie realized she was witnessing something rare. Leadership that wasn't about commanding from the top, but about lifting from within. Ricky wasn't trying to be the boss or the star. He was simply being human in a way that reminded everyone else to be human, too. These small gestures were creating something larger than entertainment. They were building the kind of collaborative spirit that turned good films into great ones. And for Angie, they were providing a blueprint for how she wanted to approach her own career in Hollywood. But as meaningful as these public moments were, it was what happened between her and Ricky in their private interactions that would leave the deepest impression of all. The breakthrough moment. The breakthrough moment came during their 4th week of filming. Angie and Ricky were working on a particularly challenging scene, one that required subtle chemistry and perfect timing between their characters. They'd run through it several times, but something wasn't clicking. The dialogue felt forced. The emotions weren't quite landing. And you could see Howard Hawks growing increasingly concerned behind the camera. That's when Ricky did something that completely changed Angie's understanding of what it meant to be a scene partner. Instead of focusing on his own performance or getting frustrated with the repeated takes, Ricky quietly asked Hawks for a few minutes to work through the scene with Angie off camera. Not to run lines. They both knew those perfectly. But to really dig into what their characters were feeling in that moment. What followed was one of the most generous acting partnerships Angie had ever experienced. Ricky didn't approach it as the famous recording artist helping the newcomer or even as an equal sharing ideas. He came at it with genuine curiosity about her interpretation of the scene and how they could build something together that neither could create alone. When Angie looked back on those weeks in 1958, she realized that Ricky Nelson had done something extraordinary without even trying. He had changed the way people felt about their work. The crew members who were there still remembered the way Ricky made them feel valued. Years later, when Angie ran into some of those same crew members on other productions, they would smile and say, "Remember Rio Bravo? Remember Ricky?" It wasn't his acting they talked about first, it was the kindness. In an industry that often focuses on speed, budgets, and ego, his presence had been like a breath of fresh air. He made people slow down just enough to notice each other and appreciate the effort it took to create something together. Angie believed that this was one of the reasons the film itself felt so special. The atmosphere on set had been one of respect and warmth, and somehow that energy had found its way onto the screen. It was proof, in Angie's mind, that how a movie is made can be just as important as the final product the audience sees. For decades, Angie never told the full story of Ricky Nelson's quiet gestures and thoughtful actions. Part of it was her own nature. She wasn't the type to share private moments just for publicity. But another reason was that she felt protective of Ricky's legacy. She didn't want these stories to be taken out of context or turned into a shallow headline. Ricky's kindness wasn't a brand or a strategy, it was simply who he was, and Angie wanted to preserve that truth. It wasn't until much later in her life, after Ricky had passed away, that she felt ready to share the story. By then, she had seen enough of Hollywood to know how rare his qualities truly were. She realized that younger generations, who might only know Ricky through his music or his public persona, deserved to hear about the kind of person he was when the spotlight wasn't on him. And so, in interviews and conversations, she began to tell the story, not for drama or gossip, but as a reminder of the power of small acts of respect and kindness. In a world where fame often magnifies flaws and rewards arrogance, Ricky Nelson's example stood out all the more. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he seemed to understand instinctively that success means little if you lose your humanity along the way. For Angie, that was the real secret side of Ricky Nelson, not a scandal, not a hidden romance, but a deep-rooted humility that shaped everything he did. This wasn't the kind of story that made front-page news, but it was the kind of story that stayed with people for a lifetime. Angie often thought about how different the world might be if more people, inside and outside of Hollywood, took the time to make others feel seen and valued. Ricky's way of moving through the world had cost him nothing, yet it had given so much to those around him. And in a business built on appearances, that kind of authenticity was pure gold. When Angie finally spoke openly about Ricky's secret side, she knew it might surprise people who only remembered him as a handsome teen idol or a smooth-voiced singer. But she hoped that hearing about his humility and generosity would deepen their appreciation for him. To her, Ricky's greatest achievement wasn't his music or his acting, it was the way he treated people when no one was watching. She wanted fans to understand that behind the fame was a young man who approached life with curiosity, treated everyone with dignity, and believed that every person's contribution mattered. Angie's voice would soften when she spoke about him, and her eyes would light up with the memory. For her, those weeks on the Rio Bravo set were more than just another job, they were a reminder that kindness is a kind of legacy all its own. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, that was the part of Ricky Nelson she wanted the world to remember.